Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. My friends, we're going to continue with our document that we have been discussing with you, Operators Research Technical Manual, Tango Michael, Sierra Whiskey 7905.1. But before we do that, I cannot let some of the comments that were made by some of the elite of Hollywood go unnoticed. For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, if you get all your information from the mainstream media, you probably are not aware of this, that Peter Fonda, the brother of Hanoi Jane Fonda, and the father or the son of actor Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda was very much a nationalist and pro-American. If you look at Hollywood from the point of in the earlier days, we'll say, you know, when you get into, you had the guys like Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart was a retired Air Force colonel, okay? You had athletes like Ted Williams, who left sports on 3 occasions to go to 3 different wars. World War II, Korea, and Vietnam as a Marine Corps aviator. Folks, what has taken place is that I had a doctor say to me one time, I'm going to just describe it this way. I had a patient one time that I was really trying to figure out. Had a major league substance abuse, born with a silver spoon. His grandfather was a federal judge and so forth. And the doctor said to me, he said, Tom, it takes 3 generations to make a bum. And I really didn't know at first thought what he meant by that, and then I put some thought into it and was analytical about his statement, and he was absolutely correct. And what he was talking about was the grandfather worked, and became a federal judge. The son of the father, the patient's father, grew up along with him and toiled along with his father, was led by the example of his father's work ethic. And then when my patient grew up, generation 3, he was a bum. Everything was given to him. Everything was silver spooned. And he had no work ethic. He didn't have to worry about any kind of financial gain or physical gain or anything along that line because it was all handed to him. And I don't know if that correlation goes along with the Fondas. Hanoi Jane was an absolute slap in the face to her father. Her father was disgusted with her. His father was disgusted with Peter Fonda. And what I'm speaking about is the statement that he made 2 days ago where he went public and wanted somebodies to, quote unquote, rip Barron Trump, that's Melania and President Trump's son, from the arms of his mother and kidnap him and stick him in a cage with a bunch of pedophiles. Folks, I'm not embellishing that statement. That is verbatim. And he went public with this. And what does this say about the mindset of these people? You know, all the pedophilia that's being exposed in Hollywood. How about all the things that have gone on with regards to the drug culture in Hollywood, the pedophilia culture in Hollywood? And how is it, folks, that you are still supporting? If you're a nationalist, an American, a person of decency, why are you still watching any production that comes out of Hollywood? If you're an American, a nationalist, a person of decency who has respect for the American flags, and yes, there are 2 of them, and you have respect for every veteran who served time and took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, then why are you still watching the NFL? Why are you still attending NFL games? Why are you still watching them? Because, folks, they know what you're watching. They know what you're eating. We've gone through this document. They understand this. This isn't fabrication. The Vault 4, Vault 7, Vault 8 documents all spoke about how they were watching us. So I will tell you why if you're doing that. It's either one of two things. One, you either do not have an understanding of the algorithms that are being used and the shock testing that is being fabricated upon the American people to see where they are, what they'll accept, or you're aware of all that and you're nothing more than a sunshine patriot. One or the other, there's nothing in between. I want to stop there. Real quick, this scumbag, Mr. George Soros, his country of Hungary passed a law last night, and they are going after Mr. George Soros for a plethora of crimes, not only against the country of Hungary, but also against the people of the world for that matter. I applaud the government of Hungary for going forward with this, and we're going to be keeping our eyes on this quite heavily, my friends, because this man is a criminal. He should have been hung for what he did to all the youth that were going into the concentration camps in Germany and Poland. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we've covered on the show before that he was actually collecting things off of children his fellow age, anything of value, and taking it from them as they went to the death camps. Now, so we're going to follow this very stringently, and we're going to follow this in hopes, and we're going to offer prayer in hopes that Hungary will join with other countries, including Russia, which has international warrants out for his arrest should he enter in certain countries, and we can only hope that the government of the United States would follow suit with that. Okay, so I want to get back into this quote by Leo Tolstoy. The essence of all slavery consists in the taking the product of another's labor by force. It is immaterial whether this force be founded upon the ownership of the slave or the ownership of the money that he must get to live. Very important quote. Now, I don't have the time to get into a bunch of the stuff that we've already covered, but I just want to do a real quick synopsis of some statements here, so if you haven't seen the previous shows, you'll understand what we are discussing here. This is Operator's Research Technical Manual, Tango Michael Sierra Whiskey 7905.1. I do not recommend that you, if of course we're all being watched, but if you don't want to have a real red flag put on your, if you're scared of the government, then don't go to your home computer and get this document, because they certainly will put you at the top of their priority list. Okay, and I want to do this real quick. I'm going to keep my comments to myself. I'm going to read this verbatim, and then we're going to get into continuing with the matter of the subject. Okay, security is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e. the engineering of societal automation systems, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without the full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodology for economic conquest, must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity, and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without a loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. My friends, what they're telling you is these are the students, this is 1979, This is a document to teaching the students that were going to bring forth this silent war. Okay, silent weapon, this is historical introduction. I'm going to be real quick. Silent weapon technology has evolved from operators' research, a strategic and tactical methodology developed under the military management in England during World War II. The original purpose of the operations research was to study the strategic and tactical problems of air and land defense with the objective of effective use of limited military resources against foreign enemies. You would know that as logistics. It was soon recognized by those in positions of power that the same methods might be useful for totally controlling a society, but better tools were necessary. Social engineering, the analysis and automation of a society, requires the correlation of a great amount of constantly changing economic information, data. So a high-speed computerized data processing system was necessary which could race ahead of the society and predict when society would arrive for capitulation. Okay, relay computers were too slow, blah, blah, blah. Then they get into, invented in 1946. Breakthrough was developed in 1947 by mathematician George Danzig. Then in 1948, the transistor, invented by J. Barton, W.H. Brittain, and W. Shockley, promised great expansion of the computer field by reducing space and power requirements. With these three inventions under their direction, those in position of power strongly suspected that it was now possible for them to control the whole world with a push of a button. Immediately, the Rockefeller Foundation got on the ground floor by making a 4-year grant to Harvard College, funding the Harvard Economic Research Project for the study of the structure of the American economy. 1 year later, in 1949, the United States Air Force joined in. Folks, the Rockefeller Foundation controls about every aspect of our lives. The AMA, Rockefeller Foundation. Who's the AMA? The American Medical Association. Everything that is in medicine goes through the AMA. Controlled by who? These very same powers that orchestrated and implemented this document. You got to understand that. This is a war being waged against the American people. Let us continue. In 1952, the original grant period terminated and a high level of meeting elite was held to determine the next phase of social operations research. The Harvard Project had been very fruitful as it is borne out by the publication of some of its results in 1953, suggesting the feasibility of economic/social engineering. Now, if you really want to get into this heavy, there is a book written by Wienily Leontief, and I'll spell it, W-E-E-N-I-L-Y, capital L-E-O-N-T-I-E-F. It's put out by International Science Press. I made this, this quote, but anyway, it's called Studies in the Structure of the American Economy. This is 1953. And what it is a capitulation of, or I should say a consolidation of all that they have found out using this data to this point. Okay. And then it gets into the Maser being formed in 1954. So now they say the combination was irresistible. The Quiet War was quietly declared by the international elite at a meeting held in 1954. This would be the Bilderberg Group, held in 1954, okay? Held every year. Still, today, it was just held recently, okay? So let us just continue here. Energy is recognized as the key to all activity on Earth. Natural science is the study of the sources and control of natural energy, and social science, theoretically expressed as economics, is the study of the sources and control of social energy. This is your sweat equity, folks. This is your toils, your labors. Both are bookkeeping systems. Mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is the primary energy science, and the bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. Okay, do you remember we had that quote to you back in the 1930s when the Federal Reserve was actually taking control. They took control on December 23rd, 1913, while the Congress was away with the Federal Reserve Act. But then we had people like Louis T. McFadden and others who spoke of now depressions could be created as simple as a mathematical formula, quote unquote. Okay? This is exactly what they're talking about, folks. All right? And the technology is here now for them to do it. Okay. So now we're going to pick up where we left off the last time we went into this document. That was a very, very quick, just brief synopsis. 2 alternatives to reduce the economic indulgence of an economic system. 1, let the population bludgeon each other to death in war, which will only result in a total destruction of the living earth. 2, take control of the world, but listen to this, by use of economic silent weapons in a form of quiet warfare and reduce the economic indulgence of the world to a safe level by process of benevolent slavery and genocide. Think of these, the adjective here is benevolence, and the nouns are slavery and genocide. What does benevolence mean, folks? If you do something in benevolence, you do something in goodwill. If you help a neighbor, an elderly neighbor who can't mow his lawn every week, so once a week you go over there and you benevolently mow that person's lawn for him. Benevolent slavery and genocide. Now, the second Constitution of the United States, and there was, and we've gone over on this show many, many times, don't sit here and say, oh, this guy's a nut, there's only one. No, there are 2. Constitution for the United States, Constitution of the United States. There's a reason. 4 was the one for the Union, the states that make up the Union, and of is in possession of. On the second one, the of, you're going to see the 14th Amendment after they took everybody off they took the black people off the private plantation and put everybody on the federal plantation. You're going to see that there was what? No involuntary servitude. So what does that mean? What's the abstract to involuntary servitude? Voluntary servitude. We contract with these people every day and put ourselves in a state through voluntary action and contract of benevolent slavery. Have you seen the law that says you've got to pay an income tax to a subparent corporation known as the IRS, to the parent corporation, private for-profit banking corporation known as the Federal Reserve Bank? No. You volunteer to do that. Look up the IRS code. Look up the definition of taxpayer. 98% of the American people don't qualify for the definition of taxpayer. Look up the definition of taxable income. Your income doesn't qualify on 98% of the American people as taxable income. But what do? You volunteer this contract. You actually fill out, what is it called? An application. You requested to contract with this for-profit banking corporation. Look it up. We've covered this on the show many years ago. Benevolent slavery and genocide. Let us continue. The later option has been taken as the obviously better option. At this point, it should be crystal clear to the reader with why absolute secrecy about this silent weapons is necessary. The general public refuses to improve its own mentality and its faith in its fellow man. It has become a herd of proliferating barbarians and, so to speak, a blight on the face of the earth. They do not care enough about economic science to learn why they have not been able to avoid wars despite religious morality, and their religious or self-gratifying refusal to deal with earthly problems renders the solution of the earthly problem unreachable by them. Why do you think that is? Because we have been dumbed down. Charlotte Iserbyt's book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, who was Charlotte Iserby, Secretary of Education, Reagan administration. She had all the documents in the book. UNESCO controls our education or indoctrination system, not your local school board. Your local school board is nothing more than a liaison of authority between the powers to be, UNESCO, the deliberate dumbing down of America, and they're the salespeople to the local towns and cities. That's all they are. Folks, I have spoken to many people on various school boards, and they will tell you they have no power. Zero. None. United Nations Education, Scientific, Cultural Organization controls the education in this country. A foreign entity. And it's rather costly, wouldn't you say? Let us continue. Okay. It is left to those few who are truly willing to think and survive as the fittest to survive, to solve the problem for themselves as the few who really care. Can you say they're doing this in benevolence? Otherwise, exposure of the silent weapon would destroy our only hope of preserving the seed of future's true humanity. Okay. Now, household industry. They're going to start breaking down here how they model us. Household industry. The industries of finance, banking, manufacturing, and government, really counterparts of the pure industry of capital goods and services, are easily defined because they are generally logically structured. Because of this, their technical coefficients can be easily deduced. Now, they use this word a couple of pages back, coefficients, and we spoke a little bit about ballistic coefficients. You know, how you can determine from muzzle velocity and grains of the bullet and all these different things and all the factors that have influence upon that projectile. You can determine, that's what a sniper, that's what a marksman does. Knowing these coefficients, the effects, all these various effects, they can come with a foregone conclusion by putting the amount, the right proper amount of grains of powder, the right type of powder, you know, whether it's triple F or whatever, the right projectile, the right rifle, the right twisting. What were the wind conditions, barometric pressure? All these things they can put into household economic factors. Okay. Because of this, their technical coefficients can be easily deduced. This, however, is not the case with the service industry known as the household industry. This is 1979. The problem with a theoretical economic faces is that the consumer preferences of any household is not easily predictable, and the technical coefficients of any one household tend to be nonlinear, very complex, and variable function of income and prices and etc. Computer information, however, derived from the use of universal product codes, RFIDs. This is what General Petraeus was talking about. We are watching what you're eating through your refrigerator. We know how often what you're using for detergent through your dishwasher, through your clothes washer. We know when you're traveling. We know what you're watching. We know who you're writing, what you're writing. We know they've got it all, folks. They have the Fourth Amendment in this country is gone. Gone. You remember the Fourth Amendment, don't you? If not, shame on you. Because this is the contract you have with this insolvent corporation called the USA Inc. And what it says, the Fourth Amendment, is that you will be secured in your papers and places and things. Are you secured if someone's watching everything you do, everything you eat, listening to your most intimate conversations, who you're writing to? No. It's gone. Why is it gone? Because we allowed it to be gone. Let us continue. Okay, but the UPC method is not yet available on a national or even significant regional scale. This is 1979, folks. Do you think the UPC with the RFIDs are all national? No, it's global. It's global. They've got it now. To compensate for this data deficiency, again, this is 1979, an alternative indirect approach of analysis has been adopted known as economic shock testing. Now, we got into economic shock testing using it with the analogy of aviation. Remember, folks, I can't go back to that for the sake of time, I'm sorry. This method, widely used in the aircraft manufacturing industry, hence they had brought it up earlier, develops an aggregate statistical sort of data. Applied to economics, this means that all of the households in any region or in any nation are studied as a group or class rather than individually. And the mass behavior, rather than the individual behavior, is used to discover useful estimates of the technical coefficients governing the economic structure of the hypothetical single household industry. So what they're doing, folks, is they're consolidating all of us with data. They shock test us with different influences and coefficients to see what generally speaking, what our reaction will be. Hence, they can then break this down into regional areas, hence into individual areas. Okay. Notice in the industry, okay, I'm not going to get into that, folks, for the sake of time. Economic shock testing, I know we've done some of this, but let me just be real quick. Okay, and I want to go back to the aircraft airframe. Again, remember that this is for students. This is a new science. This is for students they're trying to use these analogies so they can put it together in their heads, this new science. In shock testing of an aircraft airframe, the recoil impulse of firing a gun mounted on that airframe causes shock waves, and that structure will tell aviation engineers the conditions under which parts of the airplane or the whole airplane or its wings will start to vibrate or flutter like a guitar string, a flute reed, a tuning fork, and disintegrate or fall apart in flight. Economic engineers achieve the same result in studying the behavior of the economy and the consumer public by carefully selecting a staple commodity such as beef, coffee, gasoline, sugar, and then causing a sudden change or shock in its price or availability, thus kicking everybody's budget and buying habits out of shape. They then observe the shock waves, which result by monitoring the changes in advertising, prices, and sales of that and other commodities. They got it all. The object of such studies is to acquire a know-how to set the public economy into a predictable state of motion, which will convince the public that certain expert people should take total control of the money system and reestablish security, listen to this now, rather than liberty and justice for all. I am not embellishing. This is their own writing, and let me say it again. The objective of such studies is to acquire know-how to set the public economy into a predictable state of motion, which will convince the public that certain expert people should take control of the money system and reestablish security rather than liberty and justice for all. When the subject citizens, not when the sovereign citizens, no, when the subject citizens are rendered unable to control their financial affairs, they, of course, become totally enslaved and become a source of cheap labor. Not only the price of commodities, but also the availability of labor can be used as a means of shock testing. Labor strikes deliver excellent test shocks to an economy, especially in the critical services such as trucking, communications, public utilities, energy, water, garbage collection, etc. By shock testing, there is found that there is a direct relationship between the availability of money flowing in an economy, you know it as the M3, and the psychological outlook and response of the masses of people dependent on that availability. Can you say the Great Depression? This is exactly what they did in the Great Depression. First of all, they had a mini depression in 1920 and 21. And what they did was, because they had to do that, it was called the Farmers' Depression, because what they had to do, folks, because farmers, particularly in the Midwest, you see, excuse me, they could go and get credit on the future of their beet crop, their hay crop, whatever it was. They could go in the spring, go to the bank, give them an estimate. The bank would collateralize that estimate and give them a loan payable, usually with a balloon, payable in the fall upon harvest. Do you get me? So what they had to do is they had to take control of them banks, the ones that were working with the farmers in the Midwest, and that's why there was the mini depression of 1920 and 21. Then they brought in all the credit you want. Once they controlled them small Midwestern banks, then they brought in all the credit and all the money supply you wanted. You know it as the Roaring Twenties. And then, in 1929, now that everybody was in debt, they started to call back. That's right. You ever heard that term? Call back. And what they did was, folks, they started to diminish the M3, the money supply in the country, till finally there was a run on the banks because the people wanted to get what they thought was their money out of the bank to get in their possession. All the banks failed from the callback. Hence comes the Great Depression. Can you say Charles Lindbergh Sr. and Louis T. McFadden when they said that depressions and economic sequences will now be formed as easily as calculating a mathematical formula? This is what they're talking about. Let us continue. Not only the price of commodities, but also excuse me, I already read that, my apologies. By shock testing, there can be found a direct relationship between availability of money flowing in an economy and the psychological outlook and response of the masses of the people dependent upon that availability. Well, folks, we are all dependent on a type of bartering or money system. It's unfortunate now that we are nothing more than chattel, movable property which has been liened, to supplement through our toiling and sweat equity this debt, lack of money system. Because money does not encompass debt. Federal Reserve note, Federal Reserve, private bank note, an acknowledgement of debt. That's why there's two signatories, folks, on the face of that bill. One is the creditor, one's the debtor, you're the co-surety. And you may say, well, how the heck did I get in this possession? I didn't sign no contract for that, Tom. No, but your mother did when you were born with an instrument called the birth certificate, hence bonding you as a co-surety to that debt. Land of the free? Really? Home of the brave? Even more laughable. For example, there is a measurable quantitative relationship between the price of gasoline and the probability that a person would experience a headache, feel a need to watch a violent movie, smoke a cigarette, or go to a tavern for a mug of beer. It is the most interesting that by observing and measuring the economic modes by which the public tries to run from their problems, that's what they're talking about. You know, the system brings on a headache, so what do people do? A lot of people, they'll get into what's called a stage A hypnotic state. How do you do that? By watching your TV. Might want to smoke a cigarette. Or now, go do drugs. Or go to a tavern for a mug of beer. It is most interesting that by observing and measuring the economic modes by which the public tries to run from their problems and escape from their reality, and by applying this mathematical theory of the operations research, it is possible to program computers to predict the most probable combination of created shock events which will bring about a complete control and subjugation of the public through a subversion of the public economy. you getting this? See, folks, 1973, when we, the United States, formed OPEC, because there was no more gold or silver to back our foreign exchange dollars. That's right. We had two separate dollars, folks, at that time. We had ones that for overseas that were still backed partially by gold, and then we had the domestic Federal Reserve notes that were backed by our ignorance, our apathy, and our sweat equity. But that ended in 1973 when the private for-profit banking Federal Reserve took all what was left of the gold and silver. Hence, we had to come up with another way. They had to come up with another way to format and substantiate and back these notes of debt. And what they did, my friends, was they formed OPEC. Oil-producing, exporting countries. That's right, we formed OPEC. And we told Saudi Arabia, we're not going to get involved in your domestic affairs. We're going to make you rich beyond all. We're going to protect you militarily. And you, in turn, are going to sell your oil to us. And you're going to take a percentage of your earnings and you're going to buy these things known as treasury bonds so we can keep this boat afloat. You think that was a pretty good, well-conceived shock test? Let us continue. Okay. The economic amplifiers are the active components of economic engineering. The basic characteristics of any amplifier, mechanical, electrical, or economic, is that it receives an input control signal and delivers energy from an independent energy source to a specified output terminal in a predictable relationship to that input control signal. The simplest form of economic amplifier is a device called advertising. If a person is spoken to by a TV advertiser as if he were a 12-year-old, then, due to suggestibility, he will, with certain probability, respond or react to that suggestion with the uncritical response of a 12-year-old and will reach into his economic reservoir and deliver its energy to buy that product on impulse when he passes it in the store. And they've gone even a step further with subliminal messaging, which is constantly impulsing on your TV screen. An economic amplifier may have several inputs and outputs, however. Its response may be instantaneous or delayed. Its circuit symbol may be a rotary switch. If its options are exclusive, qualitatively go or no go, or it might have a parametric input-output relationship to an input control signal. For this reason, it is called an active circuit element or component. Folks, what's in a circuit? Currency. If you're talking about an electrical circuit, it's the electricity. If you're talking about an economic circuit, it's your sweat equity, your energy. I hope you're following me here. Let us continue. Whatever its form might be, its purpose is to govern the flow of the energy from its source to an output sink in direct relationship to an input control signal. For this reason, it is called an active circuit, an element, or component. Economic amplifiers fall into classes called strategies. And in comparison with electronic amplifiers, the specific internal function of an economic amplifier are called logistical instead of electrical, which is what I just tried to explain to you earlier. Therefore, economic amplifiers not only deliver power gain, it depends who's in control of that power to reap the gain, doesn't it? And if we're not in control of our money system, and the foreign for-profit bankers are, then who is in control of the shock testing? Who's in control of the mechanics of the circuitry? And who is reaping the gain? They are. Who is volunteering themselves into a position of benevolent slavery? We are. In design of an economic amplifier, we must have the same idea of at least 5 functions, which are: 1, the available input signals; 2, the desired output control objectives; 3, the strategic objectives; 4, the availability of economic power sources; and 5, the logistical options. The process of defining and evaluating these factors and incorporating the economic amplifier into an economic system has been popularly called game theory. The design of an economic amplifier begins with a specification of the power level of the output, which can range from personal to national. The second condition is accuracy of the response, i.e., how accurately the output action is a function of the input commands. High gains combined with strong feedback help to deliver the required precision. Most of the error will be in the input data signal. Personal input data tends to be specific, while national input data tends to be statistical. Okay, I hope you're following. What they're saying here, folks, is that, yes, they can look at this broadly, but using these 5 methodologies, they can look at this with very good accuracy. This is where these analogs come in, folks. This is how people like Amazon know that you're going to order something before you even order it. What was that figure? 92% of the time. Well, of course, folks, all we are is a gerbil in a bigger box known as our houses. And they're looking through the walls. They're looking through everything. Their research, they've got every bit of data on us. They know more about us than we have analytically figured out about ourselves. And if they have all this knowledge and they control our sources of information, they can take us down any avenue they wish. Okay. Short list of inputs. Questions that have to be answered. 1, what? 2, when? 3, where? 4, how? 5, why? And 6, who? So these are the 6 short list of the inputs that they need the information on. The whats, the whens, the wheres, the hows, the whys, and the whos. Do you think they can gain any of that without breaching our 4th Amendment? No. But they have breached our 4th Amendment. And most of us are apathetic and ignorant enough that we don't know. But there are a growing percentages of us that do know. And that percentage is probably 50-50 about who gives a damn to do anything about it. General sources of information. Now, this is 1979. Telephone tapes. What? What? They were listening to phone conversations and recording them in 1979. Surveillances. Analyzing garbage. Now, do you remember that? I forget what state it was. I want to say Michigan, but don't hold that to me. There was a person that wound up in a court. I forget what the charge was, and I'm sorry. I apologize. But he wound up in a court, and some of the evidence was in his garbage. And so he had not yet taken that garbage out to the curbside to be picked up by the trash people. So his attorney to separate one from one's property, went to the court and pleaded, because don't forget, the attorney that represents you doesn't represent you at all. They represent the court. You ask your attorney who they represent, and he will tell you he is an officer of the court first. His or her first obligation as an attorney is to the court, to maintain the status quo. That's why they're called esquires, because they belong to the guild, the foreign guild that controls the courts in this country, known as the Bar Association, British Accreditation Registry, Esquire, a title of British nobility. You get it? But this gentleman was busted for something, and the court said, no, it's your garbage. You do not have the right to possession of your garbage. They have been analyzing our garbage, folks, since the 60s. Hell, they've had everyone's DNA that was born since 1978 or 79. One of them, I'm sorry. I'm sort of going around the block here, but understand, folks, this is 1979. Analyzing garbage. The behavior of their children in school. They can study standards of living by the food that we eat, the clothing we wear, the shelter, our transportation. Social contracts, telephone records, itemized records of each call, family, all marriage certificates, birth certificates, etc. All your friends, your associates, etc. Memberships in various organizations, etc., and all of your political affiliations. The personal paper trail, personal buying habits, personal consumer preferences, all your checking accounts, all your credit card purchases, tagged credit card purchases, the credit card purchases of products bearing the UPC. Assets, all your checking accounts, savings accounts, real estate, businesses, automobiles, city deposits at banks, stock markets. And you thought that everything that you had in your city deposit bank was secure. Liabilities, your creditors, your enemies, all your loans, all your consumer credit. Government sources, welfare, Social Security, USDA, surplus foods, doles, grants, and subsidies. Government sources. Now listen to this. I am not adding one word here. Government sources via intimidation. Let me read that again. Government sources via intimidation. Well, isn't that the definition of terrorism? To get one to act by the use of fear. That's the definition of terrorism. What do you think is the very first agency that is listed here for government sources via intimidation? Come on, folks. What's the number one you fear the most? IRS, Internal Revenue Service. Oh, and you got a business? What's number two? OSHA. And they go on to other ones here. Principle of this ploy. The citizen will almost always make the collection of information easy if he can operate on the free sandwich principle of eat now, pay later. Other government sources, surveillance, and included in this list is the U.S. Postal Service. Habit patterns, programming, strengths and weaknesses. 1, activities, sports, hobbies, etc. 2, see legal. So I go see legal. What do I find in legal? Listen, I am not adding a word. The use of fear, the use of anger. Can you say Hegelian dialectic? Create a crisis, Get the emotional response you want from the people. What did George Hegel tell us? The two most important emotions that you had to bring out from the creation of that crisis was what? Fear and anger. Crisis, reaction, solution. Hospital records, drug sensitivities, reaction to pain, etc. Psychiatric records, fears, angers, disgust, adaptability, probability. Woo! Adaptability, probability. They want to see individually and broadly how much they have to stimulate or shock test us to get their response that they're desiring from creating the shock test. Reaction probability. How many times do I have to punch you in the face before I'll get you to tell me whatever I'm looking for? And you think this government is here as a benevolent organization. Okay, let us continue. Angers, disgust, adaptability, probability. Reactions to stimuli, violence, suggestibility to any hypnosis, pain, pleasure, love, and sex. Yeah, that's right, folks. They know all about your pain levels. They know all about what you desire for pleasure. They know all about your love life, and they know all about your sex life. And if you're into diddling little boys, they're going to make you part of their game because they have something to weigh over you. This is why so many of these people in prominent positions are pedophilia. From the judges to the teachers to the administrators to Hollywood, to all of them. Because they're in a position of power because they are vulnerable to all of what I just read to you. Methods of coping, of adaptability and behavior. In other words, how will we cope if we're put under stress? Consumption of alcohol, consumption of drugs, entertainment, religious factors influencing behavior, other methods of escaping from reality. Payment modus operandi. You pay on time. Payment of telephone bills, energy purchases, electric, gas, etc. Water, payments of loans, house payments, automobile payments, payments on credit cards. They know everything, folks. Absolutely every single thing about you. And it's all being used for your benevolent slavery condition. Political sensitivity. 1, what is your beliefs? 2, contracts. 3, position. 4, your strengths and weaknesses. 5, your projects and activities. Legal inputs, behavioral control. Excuses for investigation, search, arrest, or employment of force to modify said behavior. Behavior control. I want to write that, see this again. Excuses for investigation, search, arrest, or employment of force to modify behavior. Oh, we got this terrible drug deal, even though we're bringing in all the drugs from Afghanistan now and from Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand and Southeast Asia back in the 70s, but we're bringing in all the drugs, but we got a terrible drug epidemic in this country, so we're going to take your rights and liberty because of the creations that we created. You get me? We got all this alcohol on the streets, and we got people drinking and driving. Sure, we're going to sell the alcohol, and we're going to profit greatly from it, which at one time we're going to outlaw it, so prohibition, so we could control it, and then legalize it, and then control it and profit from it. But we're going to have these roadblocks because of you nasty people having a beer. And you accepted it. Adaptability. My friends, we're going to continue with this document next week. We thank you very much for watching our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, obtain knowledge, manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. we thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find.